All right, so we're going to talk about the metal and the spirit of the lung and the large intestine. So the metal elements, the autumn, according to the ancient Chinese, the breath of the white tiger of the West, right? That's the direction of the autumn, right? In the old time, there's like fire in the south, water, wood in the east, water's in the north, wood is in the east, metal's in the west, right? That's where the sun sets. This is the breath of the white tiger of the West is said to bring storms and cold winds. So what can't be harvested, as we know, drops to the ground, and then the rains come and rot all of that material, where it is absorbed into the soil, which serves as fertilizer for the following spring. So that's the time of letting go of what's no longer of value in the moment. It has value, but it has no value in the moment, right? It's almost like an investment, this rotting plant material, these, dying animals that decay, their minerals go into the soil. That's an investment into the following spring, right? Which is kind of an interesting aspect of like the letting go, where it's like we talk very superficially about like I'm letting go of what no longer serves, but it's really more about what no longer serves, like right now. Okay. As well as taking in the crisp, the drier, crisper air of the fall, right? The heavenly chi, which is the air. So interestingly enough, when fall comes, the chlorophyll, what makes the leaves green, the chlorophyll dies and decays, leaving behind the heavy mineral content that makes up the structure of the leaf. And whatever minerals are left over, they obviously reflect and absorb certain wavelengths of light. So the colors that you see, the red, the gold, the rusty brown, the yellows even, right? All of these are the minerals that are left behind before they break down. So that's why we get these like wildly colored leaves. And it's interesting because it's sort of like this last flourish. You think, oh, that kind of reminds me of fire, like this, it's got a lot of luster. It's very young. They're bright. They're brilliant, right? There's a lot of luminosity. And so that's an inner aspect of the metal that reminds us that underneath, within, is this incredible brilliance that, like metal, right? Like painted metal, you scrape off the paint, you scrape off the rust, right? And then underneath of it is this shiny substance, right? So, it's through the letting go process that actually provides more clarity and of the luminosity within. And this will figure a little bit later as I talk about lung and large intestine specifically, but it's that inner brilliance within the outer facade that often most interests healthy metal CFs. While they take account face value, they do take into account how people look and how people are dressed and how people behave, the outer, right? For themselves especially, right? And it's interesting to me that like a lot of metal CFs, not all, right? This isn't like a definitive characteristic, but it is a unique characteristic more than others. There are, of course, every CF has some aspect of this, but a lot of metal CFs like to smell good. They like, they're the ones that wear like a lot of body spray or cologne or essential oils or perfumes, right? They like to smell good. And there's something about that aromatic quality that like fills the lungs, right? That's penetrative, right? And that brightens our mood. It uplifts our spirit, right? I mean, nobody walks out, nobody sprays like, deer spray on themselves, right? I mean, right? They're not trying to ward off predators, right? They want to attract. So there's this quality of like looking good for the sake of looking good, for their sense. It props up their sense of value. It props up their sense of refinement, right? Their excellence. Like they want to be high quality, right? So that's how that kind of figures in. It's pretty interesting as an aside. So I don't know how to pronounce it correctly, but the character is QUI. It's often phoneticized as QUI. Trey. It's drawn, this is for the autumn, right? This is drawn as grains, right? Ripening under the heat, the intense heat of the sun. And it represents like the final leaves falling to earth and the fires of the waste stalks, right? That are burned in these big bonfires, leaving behind this ash. So it's the season when the grain stalks are burned down to the, like, so completely that it's nothing left but like white ash. And then meanwhile, the storehouses are full of this like golden ripe grains, right? And so the character shows 3 strokes of fire and a plant with a ripened ear at the top, right? Like almost like a cornstalk or like a grain of wheat or barley. And this represents, the time when the growing seasons come to an end and the waste needs to be returned to the soil so it can lie dormant and fallow through the winter. But during that fallow time, like nothing is happening. Like during that autumn season, there's a rotting process, there's a decaying process, which on the outside seems depressing and ugly. But this is the investment in the springtime, right? So compost, like metal CFs would be like the ones with the bumper sticker that says compost happens, right? Right. So the character for autumn, it's interesting. If you take the character for autumn and you place it over the character for the heart, it means melancholy or sad, which is really interesting. So this is because, the ancient Chinese would say that the falling leaves of the autumn weigh down the heart with sadness. In the autumn, the movement is downward, right? So we've got like we come up out of the abyss of water into the burst of new growth of spring, and then the luxurious lusciousness of the summer, right? And then as that light starts to fade, as that outer luminosity fades, right? Then we move back down and in, right? This is the time of letting go of the luxurious growth that comes with like all of that yang. But as the yang diminishes, it can't sustain that growth, right? That's why evergreen trees don't flower. It takes a lot of energy to create a flower. It takes a tremendous amount of energy to create a piece of fruit. An immense amount of it, like an ungodly amount of energy goes into creating flowers and fruit. So what do they create? They create pine cones. That's how they dispense their seeds, which is like another, like just as inert as the green of the evergreens of these coniferous trees, right? So this is a time when the movement downward of the autumn is a time for remembering what we've let go of and to accept that, to bow to life as it is, to acknowledge that cycles come to an end, but it's not the end with a capital E. It's just the end of this cycle. But there is a quality of sadness. Our heart is yang. Our heart is of the element of fire. So as that brightness diminishes on the outside, that can't help but affect the heart, which resonates with the fire. The fire, the heart loves the fire element. I mean, it loves all the energetics, but it misses that which resonates with itself, right? So, and it's interesting that it's in a co-cycle relationship with the metal, because the metal has to remember right? And this is why a lot of metal CFs are nostalgic. There's a strong natural emphasis on remembering the yang, to not lose sight of the yang in the midst of the diminishing yang. And that's how fire controls the metal, by keeping it warm. Because when metal is warm, it's malleable and usable, right? If it gets too cold, it gets too inert and brittle and is prone to breaking, right? So metal, from the perspective of the human being, is useful when it can be manipulated, when it can be, when we take use of its malleability, right? So we're letting go of this great energy of the summertime that has created the year's harvest, right? All of that yang sun and the heavenly rain, right? Along with the richness of the soil, heaven and earth come together. And now that disparity between heaven and earth is not as great anymore as in the summertime, right? Because, the days are longer, much more yang, right? So there's a greater disparity. But now that disparity is diminishing, and it's becoming more yin and becoming more connected to the downward movement. So you may experience this in the presence of some of your patients, where you're just kind of sitting there with them. And if you're not if you're not someone that resonates predominantly with the metal, it might feel a little bit down. You might feel a little bit heavy. But that's their state, right? They're reminding us of the autumn time, right? So the rich minerals of the soil nourish the plants that grow in the earth, right? And if you look at not autumn, but the metal element itself, the character Qin is drawn as two golden nuggets in the earth underneath the topsoil. So in the ancient times, when they said metal, they were really referring to gold as the sort of metaphorical representative of metal, because gold, it does lie deep in the earth. It's very malleable, right? It's probably one of the most malleable metals we have, right? But there's an ancient saying in Chinese, at least I'm told, that although gold and silver may fill your house, no one can keep them. Right? That means everything decays. In the same way, you can hammer up like a blade into something that's like razor sharp, but as soon as you start to use it, it begins to blunt, right? So that's the outer metal, that's the outer gold, right? It shines, it's shiny, right? And when you feel it, it has I can't remember the term in physics, but it's cooler, right? When you put your hand on metal, it feels cooler than wood, right? If you put your hand on stone, that's cooler than soil, right? It can't retain heat very well. So it needs a constant, steady supply of warmth. That's that connection to the fire. Otherwise, it gets cold and inert and very brittle and can then easily break. So, to the ancients who were focused on self-cultivation, they looked at the outer material wealth was a reflection of something that we carry inside ourselves, just like underneath the topsoil of our physical body, our outer appearance, our facade, within that, hidden is the inner gold, right? This is our inner beauty. These are the virtues and qualities that just are innately, full of quality, right? That innately have value, just like gold innately has value, right? Again, how much value is open to agreement by the society that utilizes it, right? Gold goes up, price of gold goes up, price of gold goes down, silver goes up, silver goes down. But no one says, well, gold's not valuable, who cares, right? They're not going to throw that in their trash, because it's innately, there's something that we understand is innately valuable through its usefulness, and its beauty. So a lot of the folks that I treat on metal, they have a lot of issues around the beauty of things, the value of things, the usefulness of things, and especially themselves. So a lot of metal CFs can be very harsh in their judgment of self or others because something is either ugly or not useful, like it's a waste of air. These people are like wasting oxygen on Earth. I can't believe they're allowed to live, right? So punishment can be harsh and swift. Judgment can be harsh and swift, just like a guillotine coming down from heaven, cutting off, right? Making this very definitive, final decision, decree, right? So if metal is not warmed by fire, if their inner lung and large intestine is not warmed by the fire officials, if they don't have healthy fire officials, they can come off being very righteous, right? This is the way of like beauty. This is like the way of heaven. Like heaven, why is it this way? Because heaven's decreed it so, because it just is, right? Because there's just something inside of them that says, no, this feels right, and you can't sway me, and I will not bend. I will not budge, right? You think about like the Mandalorians, right? This is the way, right? But then what happens? Things evolve, and then eventually, you know, there's a small group of people who are allowed to take off their helmets, right? I don't know if you know what I'm talking about at all, but it's okay. I forgot you're students and you have no lives, so yeah, I get it. Anyway, if you look it up, it's part of the Star Wars universe. This race of beings called the Mandalorians, and they're like kind of like they're like a warrior culture, and they have these like special helmets, and they're never allowed to take them off in front of someone else. And every time they're talking about like how something is done, it's very British. I think it's really modeled on the British, like, because JR would be like, that will not do, right? You like, that's just not the way it's done. If you watch like any kind of British show that deals with the royalty and somebody wants to do something out of tradition, they're like, no, that's just not the way it's done, right? That's that sort of metal quality. Like, I don't care about your feelings. I don't care about the current moment. Like, it came from this burning bush, and that's the way it is, and that's the way it's going to be forever and ever and ever and ever. No exceptions, not even for you, right? Because it's not about this. It's about this connection, right? So there's a big emphasis on beauty, on what's right, what's fine, what's excellent, what's cultivated and developed, what's refined, right? So in a way, life is the crucible that provides the fires to purify the inner being. So a lot of metal CFs, not all, because some actually take the opposite tack. A lot of metal CFs are in like really into like personal cultivation, right? If you ever watch, there's a show I liked, oh God, I'm blanking out on it. But the lead character was played by an actor named Titus Welliver. Bosch. He plays a Los Angeles police detective. And every time he talks about something, he's like, oh, this is the best taco truck in LA. Or, oh, that's the best sushi in LA. Or, oh, this is the best like jazz album of all time. Like he doesn't care about anything else but the best. Like that's so metal. Like they don't, like, oh, let's go to this place. It's okay. They would never say that. Never. They're like, no, we're going here because it's the best place in the city, right? All right. So there's this quality that's less about like fire transformation. Fire is about like, they really like to transform. They like to reinvent themselves. They like to be a new creation. But metal is more about greater and greater refinement and purification That would be like, the people, and I'm not saying all Olympic athletes are medal CFs, but like this would be like to strive to be the most excellent, right? Not the most powerful, right? But to be like the finest, the fairest in the land, the most beautiful, like the most refined, the most cultivated, right? That's a very medal impulse. And we all have some of that. Like every CF has that. But to what degree do we activate that? Why? Because there's no explanation for it. There's no rationale. There's no reasoning. It's just this inner drive to be like the most beautiful, the most refined, the most excellent, right? The most cultivated, right? Whatever you can put an EST at the end, that's what they want, right? Not the second, but I'm the greatest of all time, right? I'm not making a political statement, but if you listen to how Donald Trump talks, right? It's like everything is the most EST in history. And everyone's like, well, no, not really. I drew the biggest crowds in the history of inaugurations. Well, not really. Nope, I did, right? Right? Because so there's no arguing it. There's no arguing it. Medal CFs don't care about data. Right? They care about their inner connection to what it is that they're experiencing. Now, I'm not saying all medal CFs are not logical. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is when it's out of balance and their ego gets involved, that's when this kind of takes over. Or on the flip side, everything is the worst. They focus on the worst of everything, right? I have an acquaintance that's just like, I guess there's something in his brain that drives him to scan the news, to find the most depressing news story, to find like the worst example of humanity. And that's what he focuses on, right? You could bring something up. Yeah, but this typhoon in Thailand, boy, that wiped out 1,000. Okay, you win. That was the worst. Right? So it's not all, like if you think about like people who are like really driven to put on like this really super refined, like very put together appearance. Or on the flip side, people are like in the old days, there was this cartoon called Peanuts. You should look it up. There's a character named Pigpen. And every time, and it's about these kids, like the Peanut Gallery, right? I think it's from like the 50s and 60s, and for a little while, the 70s. And there's this one character, and he's a minor character, but his name is Pigpen. And every time he's drawn like in this cloud of like dirt and dust. And he's always filthy. That would be like the flip side. There's a great movie called American Splendor with like one of my most favorite actors. He's so good. But anyway, it's about this real life guy named Harvey Pekar who would create these sort of like adult, not sexual, but like adult themed comics, like for adults, not little kids. And it was called American Splendor. And they made this movie about him and his life, played by Paul Giamatti. And, you've seen Paul Giamatti. He's sort of this like kind of dumpy character. He's not, he's not John Hamm, you know what I mean? Like, so he's meeting this girl for the first time. They've been corresponding, and finally he invites her to his place, and he opens the door and she walks in, and this place is just like filthy, filled with like all of this crap, like everywhere. Like he's a sort of a quasi hoarder. And he's like, well, I thought about cleaning up the place for you, but I figured, well, what the hell? You might as well see me for who I am. Like that's a large intestine CF, right? That's like this is the way it is, man. Compost happens. All right. Let's briefly talk about grief. So grief, the character is Bay. So Bei is drawn as someone refusing something over the character for the heart. So in a way, this can be interpreted as someone is refusing to accept what's happening over the heart, which means it makes us upset, right? Anytime the heart is drawn, it generally refers to something about our feelings, one way or the other, right? Something that affects us emotionally, because the heart is the only organ that feels. So this is like when we can't accept something, that means we don't have something else. And our heart, well, not our heart, but our mind experiences that as a loss of something I wanted that didn't occur, or a loss of something that I had that I no longer have. And I refuse to accept what's going on. Remember, the energy of the metal is down. It's a bowing, right? So, when we show respect, like in the cultures, like especially in the Asian cultures, when they're trying to display respect, they don't go, right? They bow, right? That means I'm willing to recognize and accept that I am not the best and the most important and the most eternal and the most powerful, right? That means I'm willing to sort of like lower my heart and lower my mind in your presence, just a little bit, right? Because that's what acknowledges that heaven is greater than us. So to bow to something is like an sort of an innate acknowledgement, right? So grief is basically the refusal to acknowledge what is. And the greatest truth is that all things die, right? When the sun is in the west, its power is diminishing, and eventually the light goes out. At least the sun that we can see is gone. So in a way, that bowing is like us facing west, metaphorically in our heart, acknowledging, right, that, we're not in charge, right? Is to mimic that light within ourselves so we don't put ourselves in a superior position, right? So this, by and large, implies that there's some kind of interruption in the flow of our vitality, and that there's a separation between myself and my environment, which is why we get choked up, because the lungs are one of the few organs that has such a close direct connection to our external environment. Yeah, the stomach kind of does, but it has to go through our mouth, just like Ryan now is chewing, right? So we have to process something. We have to actually, like, you have to reach out, like what you're doing. You have to use your hands to reach and get something. You're not going, I'm going, right? There's a lot of work to get something into your belly. But to get something into your lungs, this is all you have to do. That's it. That's nothing, right? And you can't not do that. Like, Ryan could stop at just about any time and say, yeah, I'm full. But your lungs aren't going to go, yeah, I'm good. I'm good for the day. What can you last? Like, I don't know anybody that can hold their breath more than 4 minutes, certainly not more than 5. Although there's that really cool movie about the free divers, which is really neat. You should see that when you graduate. Right. So, we're intimately connected to the heavenly decree through the breath, right? Which allows us to reset the heart, actually, to kind of reset our feelings, to check our feelings by stopping or pausing and focusing on our breath, that allows us to focus on the moment and acknowledge the moment. So when I don't acknowledge the moment, the vitality that's generated and sustained by the routine breathing, by the rhythmic breathing, is interrupted. And that's why grief, right? It's that interruption of the breath. I am separate from the moment. I have separated myself from the heavenly decree, which is whatever it is, the moment you're breathing. So that refusal to acknowledge diminishes the quality of breath in a literal way. So I don't know if any of you, God forbid, have experienced a major loss, right? We say things like it's heartbreaking, but on a visceral level, it's pretty rare that you actually feel your heart. Like that's when it's really severe, right? You see people that are in the throes of tremendous upset and they like have a cardiac event, but that's rare. That's not super common. What's more common is that, right? It interrupts that flow of vitality where I'm bringing in the heavenly chi. And so the spirit of my body, the Po, begins to suffer from this perceived separation, which is mitigated by my refusal to accept on some level, and my refusal to bow and acknowledge life as it is. All luxurious life will cease and fall will come, again, depending on the latitude, right? Depending on the latitude, of course, right? Because fall in Jamaica is very different than fall in Maryland, right? We were in Jamaica one year for Christmas. We were in Jamaica, Mexico one year for Christmas. So like in that fall area, like there's not a huge difference, but it's very subtle, right? But there is a shift, right? So that grief is not something that can be reasoned with. And interestingly enough, like if the best way to kind of comfort somebody in grief is to just sit quietly next to them and let them know that you're with them. You're not feeling their pain, you're witnessing their pain. You're acknowledging their grief. You're acknowledging their pain. You're acknowledging their loss. There's no, when something dies, they leave that shaped hole in the universe, it will never be filled. It can't be pandered to. It can't be cheered up. It has to run its course. It will not pass until the experience has fully rotted, and then been absorbed. People are like, well, when are you going to get over your grief? I'm like, I don't know. Like, when are the leaves going to rot and break down and become fertilizer? I don't know. Like, it happens when it happens, right? So that's really the best way to like kind of be with the metal CF, is to like, you don't need to fill the empty space with meaningless words, with gestures. You're just with them. You're bearing witness and you're acknowledging their pain. You're not trying to change it. You're not trying to mollify them. You're not trying to cheer them up. You just be with them. Okay? You weep with them. You commiserate, right? There's a wonderful tradition. When I was in acupuncture school, I got a job working for this Jewish caterer, Charles Levine. And one of the things that we would do is sometimes cater people who were sitting Shiva. So if you've never heard of this, this is a phenomenal Jewish tradition where people gather after someone has died and they cover over all the mirrors because they don't want any distractions of you, like looking at yourself and trying to beautify yourself. Like they cover over all the mirrors, and all you do is sit and remember the dead. And occasionally somebody will speak to relay a story about them, but all they do for 3 days is remember the dead. It's a beautiful, beautiful ritual. And you only speak when you're moved to speak, but a lot of times you're just sitting there and you're remembering. You're acknowledging that they're gone, right? You're not trying to change anything. You're not trying to focus on yourself, right? All the mirrors are covered, right? And meals are provided for you, right? It's common that other people will come and, you know, clean and feed you, and you just sit and you remember. It's so beautiful. And that grief can then become a healthy grief where you acknowledge what is so, the heavenly decree, and you just be with it. You just bow to it as it is. So that's the best aspect of metal, right? Most metal CFs are not interested in physical or emotional comfort, but in excellence and beauty and grace and mastery. The drive towards perfection, when driven by one's ego, makes someone cold and rigid and brittle. If you think about like religious zealots, right? So to prove how much they love God, they're willing to kill you because you don't behave the way they think you should behave. Wow. Right? So on the flip side, this can devolve into people like really letting themselves go. They lose self-respect, they lose self-dignity, they don't care at all about the outer, and they can become very slovenly or abrasive or overly passive and overly malleable, right? They're not able to stand up for their principles. They become overly yielding and conceding. This is not flexibility. This is collapse. This is melting, right? For whatever feels good for the Po, right? So this would be like your, you know, die young, like, you know, live hard, die young, leave a good looking corpse, right? Think about like Amy Winehouse, right? That's somebody who had a really difficult relationship with their Po. Their Po, when their ego got a hold of their Po, and I don't mean ego as in the part of our ego that thinks that we're great. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the superficial small m mind of the small s self. When the ego gets a hold of the Po, the tail starts to wag the dog. And all we want is desire. All we want is, you know, the relatively superficial things that do not last, right? She was a beautiful woman, had an amazing voice, you know, covered with like interesting tattoos, but no one's sending her to rehab. No, 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 right? And she died, right? Yeah. So I'm just going to read this quote. I'm not trying to like promote a particular religion or spiritual path, but I just really like the quote by this gentleman named Al-Hakam ibn Utaiba. To have faith that with every raindrop there is an angel who descends with it until he places it where, you know, God, the mighty and majestic, has ordered. So I had an interesting experience. I don't talk about it a lot, but I'm willing to share it. And this is something that's, you know, available to everybody. But it was really interesting that like when I started to really focus on letting go of my outer superficial desires, I'm not a master by any means, I'm not trying to presume that, but focusing more on cultivating the inside, which I had not done in the previous 28 years of my life or 30 years of my life. There was an interesting experience I had where at one point I could see, and it's there, like this is for everybody, right? This sort of, it looked like rain, this like white rain coming down. And I thought I was hallucinating. But every time I went outside, I could see this like white, especially when you look against the backdrop of green trees, but I could see this like white rain coming down. And I didn't really know what this was for years. And then I finally came across this one spiritual teacher, and like a while bit later, I brought it up, and he's like, oh, that's that's what the Sufis call the quality of Rahman. And I'm like, oh, so Rahman is the mercy of the Most High that comes down for saint and sinner alike. He's like, oh, does it look like this sort of like fine white rain? I'm like, yeah. He's like, yeah, that's the Rahman. So I thought it was really interesting. And even in the Jewish tradition, there's this, I think it's even in the Torah that like every drop of rain is escorted down to the earth by an angel. And every blade of grass that grows, every blade of grass that grows has its own angel hovering over it, whispering, grow, grow, grow. Now, I'm not here to argue whether angels are real or whether, Rahman is real. The point is, there's a lot of people who got together and came up with individual stories that describe some sort of what we would consider heavenly assistance. So I'm not about saying, like you should believe this or not believe that. I'm just saying, I think it's really interesting that like almost every society on the planet has some version of that. And I think that that's really interesting. So again, not to make a statement about religion or spirituality, but I would say that just as there's an inner aspect of ourselves that lies beyond what can be seen from the outside, I would say there's probably something similar to the external reality, that there's something behind that or within it that is not easily apparent at first glance. But once you go through the effort of cultivating in an interpersonal relationship, this would be like just getting to know someone, right? I mean, once you get to know someone, you realize they're more than just their physical appearance, right? They have qualities, a personality, they have things that they love, things that are important to them, right? You get to know, I mean, this is why we, get in relationships, like, because it's a very wonderful, hopefully, a wonderful experience getting to know someone, and to get to know what's not immediately apparent. Like, Ryan or Melvin walk into a grocery store, I can't look at you and say, I know you. I know what you look like. I know, I can maybe guess some things by the way you dress and your posture and, and all that. But I don't know like the deeper you. And I would say that similarly, since we are a microcosm of the larger macrocosm, I would say dollars to donuts, there's got to be something to the outer environment, to the outside world, that maintains an outer aspect and an inner aspect. And there's a lot of traditions on this planet that have worked really hard to figure out how to see or perceive beyond the outer, right? And essentially, that's what all spiritual traditions do, right? Doesn't matter whether you're American Indian or Taoist or Christian or Buddhist or, whatever. It's always about getting past the outer and getting to the inner. And then getting in touch with the inner makes sense, helps us to make sense of the outer, right? Because the outer is transient. Anyway, that's my little metal soapbox. Let's take a break until 5 after, and then we will continue. Okay, so the lung, really interesting official, holds the office of the Prime Minister and Chancellor. The regulation of the life-giving network stems from it. So the prime minister and the chancellor is a very important official that kind of oversees to make sure like everything in the royal court runs smoothly and according to the emperor's wishes or the empress's wishes, right? And it's sort of like is sort of like the official that makes sure all the other officials, one, come to heel under the authority of the supreme controller, but also like get everything that they need in order to succeed and thrive. So in a way that would be like providing the chi, or providing the money, the finances, the resources, the material. They don't generate it, they don't create it, they make sure that like everybody gets it. So it's almost like if you kind of combine the Department of the Treasury with like the chief advocate for we don't really have a prime minister here in this country. We don't have like a parliamentarian kind of government, but it's like it's almost like the leader's right hand, right? And it's really more about like the court and making sure that the ministers that report to the supreme controller get what they need in order to function, in order to carry out the will of the supreme controller. So it's interesting that the channel actually begins in the middle jiao around CV12 area. So in a way, your immune system begins with your gut. It actually descends into the large intestine. Then it comes back up to the mouth of the stomach. And then it enters the lungs. And then it goes to lung 1, right? Actually, excuse me, it goes to the throat and then it goes to lung 1, forgive me. Yeah, so it starts in the middle jiao around CV12, descends, loops around the large intestine. There's some debate about whether it goes through it or around it. Then it goes back up to the mouth of the stomach, then rises up to the throat, and then trajectory goes to lung 1. And then, as you know, it goes down, the common trajectory to the thumb. So, again, to really understand an official, you have to understand where the meridian goes, both inside deeply and outside superficially, because the official lives in the channel. That is, like the channel is what carries out the day-to-day functions of that particular official on a body, mind, spirit level. So, there's things that occur physically, and then there's things that occur sort of metaphorically that resonate with that physicality on the mental and emotional and spirit level. So a lot of lung pathology, again, the upper jiao, remember we talked about the triple heater, the fluids in the upper jiao need to be like a mist, right? So anything that is either too dry is harmful, too wet and thick and turbid is harmful. So distension and fullness in the chest, right? Pain in the supraclavicular fossa region, the shoulder extending into the chest, the front of the shoulder, feeling oppression in the chest, arm pain along the trajectory of the channel, hot palms, or feelings of intense cold, or numbness or pain along the channel. And obviously, every official has their sort of version of rebellious chi. So rebellious lung chi would be a cough. Okay. So the lung is described metaphorically as a type of a plant. And if you see the lung, fei, you see this sort of like this plant of creeping vines along the ground. And that plant growth is usually attributed to wood. But interestingly, one branch of the qi, according to the Chinese clock, connects, lung 1 from liver 14. The ascending wood qi rises up, interacts with the descending lung qi to form the plant that does not shoot upwards, but actually hugs the ground and creeps. That's fei. This is the plant whose stem is compressed downwards and grows along the earth. So this could be said that this is due to the condensing and descending power of the lungs exerted by heaven pressing down, right? If we take over that downward pressure to allow the lungs to descend, that results in liver qi stagnation, liver qi depression, right? So lung has the dispersing function and descending function. So it's like the, right? Dispersing is when the lungs open to the outside, it disperses the qi over the surface and eventually circulates the qi through the primary channels. And then there's the descending function, right? This assists in the transformation of the fu qi, the gu qi, right? This is represented by that bird in the character for the triple heater, right? That weird character which shows like a bird over like some flames, like this bird being cooked. Right? But this is the transformation of the food, the gu qi, by containing it in the area of CV17 in the lungs, right? And this allows also the fluids received from the spleen to go down to the kidneys, right? The kidneys come up and grasp the qi, bring this fluid qi, fluids down, along with this descending qi that becomes part of the fluid cycle, okay? So metal in the lungs have a lot to do with connection, okay? So it's in charge of drawing in the pure of what is outside, right? That's the air, and then eliminates what's toxic inside, like back out, right? So there's this bellowing action. It takes in the heavenly qi and, eliminates and exhales and lets go of the toxic qi. So it does that in a very rhythmic way. So metal has this quality of rhythm to it, right? The bellowing of the lungs, the the peristalsis of the large intestine, right? Where it squeezes and opens and squeezes and opens, and that propels the waste, that transits the waste, okay? So there's this quality of like rhythm to it. And where there's rhythm, there's routine, right? Any extended rhythm becomes a routine, right? And so if you combine this with the qualities of purity and excellence, right? This is about like creating routines and rhythms that nourish our refinement and excellence, okay? And beautification. All right. So, I can't remember if I might have forgotten to include the body, mind, spirit summary of functions on Canvas. I didn't do that, probably. I don't remember doing that. So I'll double check. If I didn't, I'll put them up. We'll take another break at about 1:15, so I'll do it then. So just in general, again, just as a reminder on the body level, right? It governs qi and respiration, right? Receives the pure heavenly qi, the air, right? That forms the zong qi, the gathering qi in the chest that nourishes the heart and the lungs, right? It governs the qi of the entire body, right? It controls the power of one's speech and voice strength. And that qi moves, just like the wind moves the water, that qi movement supports blood circulation. Right, it controls the dispersing and descending of the qi and the jinye, the body fluids, right? It disperses the wei qi to the exterior to warm the exterior, right? Wei qi is very yang, right? It disperses the jinye to the skin and the hair to nourish and moisten the hair and the skin. It regulates with the heart, the pores for appropriate sweating. And it descends the qi and the jinye to promote their circulation, right? So it helps also with the kidney and the bladder, regulating the water passages. And it regulates the pulse, i.e. the life-giving network that's in its charge, right? And this is why the pulse is taken like where you first feel the pulse at lung 9, right? It's said to regulate the pulse, the life-giving network, right? So it starts and ends with the lung qi. And so metaphorically, that's why we start in the lung position, or, in that position, like where lung 9 is. All right, so on a mental level, this is what allows us to recognize beauty, purity, excellence. It allows us to receive it, right? Now, I know stomach is, oh yeah, all about receiving, but the emphasis there is about nourishment for the sake of comfort that then promotes the proper nourishment of the flesh, which gives us form, right? The air, right, unlike food, does not give us form, right? It is by its nature formless, right? So this is about something that's like essence, like very ephemeral, right? Very subtle, very not dense, right? Very light, ineffable. That was the word I was looking at, right? So this values, excellence, elegance, and realness, right? Again, bowing to life as it is, acknowledging, right? This is the anti-grief, acknowledging life as it is. That means they're the people that they're keeping it real, okay? And it enables us to empower, strive for transcendence through excellence and righteousness. And that's what gives them the sense of heavenly justice. So I know we talk about, wood in terms of justice, but that's really about fairness and equality horizontally, between people. The rules are there to make things fair, to allow the freedom or at least easier movement along this plane. Now, yeah, they do strive. They do have set goals, right? The movement is a sort of an up, right? Upwards. But in terms of like human development, we do want to grow up, which gives us a higher perspective, right? Like the more I grow up, the more inclusive and grander my perspective becomes. I am going in a heavenly direction, right? So, nothing is what it is unto itself, right? Wood needs the metal to fertilize that growth and to give us the capacity to stand up erect, right? It's the minerals that help to add and fortify the structure of the plant, right? The plant is like weak in minerals, it flops over, right? If the plant doesn't have enough water or too much water, it flops over, right? So, but the wood justice is really about fairness and equality. Metal justice is not about what brings about equality. Metal, in essence, like what do you call it when it's like just it's like metal inherently, thank you, inherently recognizes there's hierarchy. Like wood doesn't like hierarchy. Wood doesn't like authority that much, or at least the kind of authority that lets me be free to be me, right? So there's always this tension in society between the metal and the wood regarding rules. Metal is just like, metal couldn't give a crap about whether it feels fair to you, right? I think we've all had someone in our life that one day sits it down and says, son, life isn't fair. Life doesn't give like a rat's ass about how you feel. Like it doesn't care. It will beat you down just because it can, like it's not here for you. I mean, it kind of is, but like we have to make it for ourselves. So metal justice is about what's right, about what's perfect, about what's refined, about what's beautiful, and that which allows for transcendence, right? So it can seem harsh to somebody who's really about, well, that's not comfortable. Wait, what do you, like Ursula, what do you mean you want me to like wake up at 5 a.m. and sit and meditate for an hour? Like, that's when I want to like be sleeping and then get up and have my coffee and play with my cat, like metal's like, why is that important? That like doesn't even compute, right? So like, not about whoever came up with like that horrible, hideous, political statement, like F your feelings, like that was probably like a really angry metal CF, right? Like, it's not about not having feelings. It's not about being cold and inert. It's about transcending beyond your feelings for the sake of personal development. Like, if you want to be Michael Phelps, do you think Michael Phelps was like, oh, pool's kind of cold today, I think I'm going to take a break from training? No, right? He, and it wasn't even like so much about like the end, the goal, because like for him, there was like, there's no goal. There's no goal. It's like, I'm training to be the best, which means you have to be better than everyone else. There's no finish line for that. Yeah, he engaged in competitions where there was like, you know, you swim this many laps and it's over. You get the gold medal and it's over. But for him, like, his drive towards excellence didn't stop once he got the gold medal. He's like, yep, I'm good. No, like it's just in you to gong, perfect, right? So this can be hard for a lot of other CFs to understand, because they were built to carry this quality of like, you can have anything you want as long as you're willing to give up everything else. Now, the how you do that, that's about whether one is in balance or out of balance. The spirit is really about connecting to one's self-worth as an inherent aspect of being alive. That's why judgments from metal CFs can feel very intense and very cruel, because they're bowing to life as it is. They're the people like who the truth is the truth. They're not going to sugarcoat it, right? When they're in balance, they're not going to sugarcoat it, but they're also going to be connected to the heart to understand what's appropriate at this time. So they're not going to be, you know, stand like a metal CF parent is going to stand over their kid saying, you know, like, you know, you didn't get an A, you're worthless. They're not going to say that, right? Because there's still the aspect of the co-cycle influencing that the metal to be warmer and softer and appropriate to support, not support, but to inspire that child to excel, right? You know, there's a great movie, again, I'm dating myself, it's called The Great Santini. It's I can't think of his name because my memory is just evaporating, but but famous actor. He's been in like a gazillion movies, you'd recognize him, but he plays this Marine Corps pilot, and you know, it's about him and his family, and he's just like so harsh. He's just like so harsh. That's a great example of like a really out of control metal CF, along with like Paul Giamatti and American Splendor. But the spirit of the metal knows that everything's gonna die.
Robert Duvall was the guy. I just Googled him.
What's his name?
Robert Duvall.
Yes, thank you, Robert Duvall. I love him. Man, that guy is awesome. That guy is so awesome. So yeah, Robert Duvall in The Great Santini. He's so harsh. But when it's healthy, the metal CF, especially like the lungs, they know everything is going to die, so everything is precious. So it has to create some hierarchy of attention. Where am I going to put my chi? I'm going to put my chi towards that which is most precious, even though everything comes to an end. That's just the way it is for everything. But maybe I put my chi and attention and my heart and my breath and my sweat into that which will beautify, purify, refine, cultivate me, so that I can transcend and rise upon that hierarchy to approach heaven, to be more heavenly. Out of balance, we do that without any regard for anything else. We become cold, mission-oriented. We have no heart. We have no integrity, right? We like ambition run amok. we have no sense of fairness and equality, or flip side, we become completely resigned and we just say, ah, screw it. I'm just gonna sit in my Barca lounger and watch Netflix and eat Twinkies because what the hell, we're all gonna die anyway, so why not? I'm just gonna smoke, right? You ever hear that one? Well, why not? We're all gonna die anyway. Yeah, but how do you want to live in the meantime? I mean, it'd be nice if we all just walking along one day, hit our appointed time and poof, drop dead. That would be great, right? And sure, yeah, do all the heroin you want. But in the meantime, you've got to live, right? So I think about this one person that I was close with who basically drank and smoked himself to death. And his last years were so god awful, right? So the metal CF realizes that we're all going to die, but doesn't want to deteriorate. Or on the flip side, screw it. I don't care if I deteriorate. It's all entropy anyway. And that is a manifestation of our relationship with our own Poe. Some people look at Tom Brady, right? Now, I don't presume to know the intimate details of his life. All I can judge is just what I see that's available to me through the media and his appearances and his interviews. But he has a very, or at least had, while he was a professional athlete, a very strict, refined routine. Like the way he eats, the way he sleeps, the way he works out. Again, and look who he married, right? I mean, the greatest supermodel of all time, who was actually richer than he was. And he actually, this was really interesting to me. It's not like I'm a super Brady fan, but I admire him for his transcendent ability. He took what he had and he made the best of it. It really made the best of it, right? But he was even willing to take less money so that money could be used to get better, to sign better players, so the team would be better. So that's somebody who has a really healthy relationship with their hun. I can't transcend unless I yield a little bit and am willing to make things a little bit more fair and equitable. Because he could have written his own ticket, right? You look at a lot of people like Brett Favre, right? Where did he go when he left the Packers? Whoever gave him the most money. The Vikings in your division? Are you insane, right? And then what happened? Everyone's like, oh, Brett's the greatest. And then when he goes to Minnesota, oh, Favre is I want to kill him, right? He's the devil, right? So that's what happens when the ego kind of gets a hold of you and just I want the most shiny stones. You know what I mean? Okay. But, does that reflect the highest that you know? Okay. So what is inherent and what may not be apparent is, and especially with the lung, more so than the large intestine, we'll get into the large intestine in a minute, is the relationship with one's Poe. And the Poe is a little weird. The Poe is weird. The character is comprised of the color white, which is the color of the bones after they've been buried in the ground for a while and the flesh has rotted off, right? I remember we used to go out to Montauk a lot when I lived in New York City, and there's deer there. I was like, oh, this is wild. And so every now and then we'd be walking around through the woods or something, little woods there is in that area. And I remember one time I found a bunch of old deer bones. I'd never seen that, but in real life before. And I was like, oh, this is really cool. And they were bleach white. I mean, white. It was wild. So that's the color that's associated. You think white, why white? That's why, because of the bones. So the character is comprised of the color white, along with a Gwei, which is a disembodied spirit. That's a spirit that has not fully ascended and transcended into completely the next realm. So it's a disembodied spirit, kind of like a ghost, like a ghost that would like haunt, right? Like a poltergeist, which is not quite as bad as a polkageist, which is a ghost that carries around an accordion and plays the polka. It's very annoying. Sorry. Hopefully you never get haunted by them. It's terrible. All right. So upon death, the Po is said, our spirit is said to leave our body. And this is humbling, very humbling. Talk about keeping it real. There's an aspect of your spirit that leaves through your anus into the ground. Right? It's like, I just remember my dad's looking at me saying, pardon my French. He's like, what, you think your shit doesn't stink? Right? So like, like a lot of metal CFs when they're in or out of balance have a lot about like, oh, you think you're better than me? Oh, or I know I'm better than you. Like they have that sort of dynamic, right? But everybody, kings, queens, when Tom Brady dies, when Michael Phelps dies, when the King of England dies, when the Emperor dies, their spirit leaves through their anus. Right? Everybody poops, right? Even Giselle Bundchen, she poops, right? So, in a way, that aspect of our Po becomes the fertilizer for our next incarnation. And it is also said to be that gravitational force, right? Because like Earth generates metal, that gravitational force is said to anchor the Hun in the body. So the Po and the Hun create this tension where one kind of keeps us grounded, the Po, and another helps us to aspire for more. There used to be this America's Top 40 by Casey Kasem. I actually got to meet him once. I got to sit next to him in the bus. We were both arrested at a protest together. It was really neat. I got to ride the prison bus, the jail bus with Casey Kasem. That was cool. So anyway, his tagline was, keep your feet on the ground, keep reaching for the stars, right? That's the Hun and the Po working together, right? Like, there's this sort of contradictory, simultaneous dynamic where in many ways you are better than other people, but in many ways you're not that special, right? And the problem occurs when our ego gets attached to one or the other in positive or negative ways. So a positive way would be like, I think I'm better than everyone else and everyone is stupid and bad and unrefined. Or, right, and this is what happens when we when one nation tries to colonize another nation, right? They look at them as inferior. Oh, look at these people, running around in loincloths. They must be inferior. Oh, look at the way they, they live in like this type of structure. How quaint, right? They must be inferior. Or the other way, whereas people experience like extreme poor not just self-esteem, but poor self-value. And at the very extreme end, this would be like people who do who have like very self-destructive addictions and habits. The most glaring example would be cutting, like people who do cutting. You're literally cutting into the flesh to stimulate the Po, to remind you that you're still alive. And you're also bleeding, which is that extravasation, also clears toxic heat. And they say that like the worst part of your ego lives in your blood, right? Like, so if you can vent out these negative emotions, right? Think about the low vessels. The emotions stagnate to the chi to the point where it drives it into the blood level, the yin level. And so cutting is an attempt to release remind you you're still alive, because you need some sort of extreme example of sensation to stimulate your Po, because it's become so deadened and obscured. and then to also release this like blood level heat and toxicity. So like, it's almost like you get the evil out, right? And so, this is the aspect of the Po that like out of balance, it's like sex, drugs, rock and roll, live fast, die young, leave a good looking corpse. But on the other end, it would be like a complete disregard for our humanity, and it all becomes about the heavenly, and the worldly just becomes disposable. This is what allows, religious zealots and others, they feel completely justified in killing people that don't meet their standards, right? So a healthy lung CF and large intestine CF is someone that can acknowledge and bow to life as it is, which means not everyone is like you. And that doesn't necessarily mean everyone is inferior or superior to you. That we all have an outer and an inner. So I need to acknowledge the outer, but look past that and find the inner, to find the gem inside, to find the gold that's buried beneath the ground. There's an ancient Sufi saying, this is Allah saying to his to the humanity, saying, I am a treasure buried deep inside you, waiting to be known. Like you have to get past the outer stuff to find the inner. Again, I'm not trying to promote any particular spiritual path. I quote what I know. So, so just like when you're getting to know someone, it takes work to get past the outer to find the nuggets, that which is valuable that's hidden within. And similarly, as you grow, then you become more and more aware, hopefully, of what you carry, inside yourself. What's the treasure, what's valuable inside yourself, right? And that's, that's how we grow and develop. And then the more we see that, the more inspired we become. All right, does that make sense? All right. So a lot of lung CFs, the way they speak resonates a lot with the breath. I would say that people that resonate with the lung more than the large intestines sound a little bit weepier. And it actually sounds like there's like this sort of quality of like, they're either just about to or have just finished crying to some degree. And just like we end life with our last breath, and just like the sun sets in the west, when they talk, it's kind of like the breath kind of just like slowly rolls over a cliff, like the fog rolling over the ground, and they just kind of run out of air. And then there's space for a long time. That's more lung. That's how lung kind of say. They like talk, and they talk, and they talk, and then they're done. Right? That's metal, right? Especially lung. Large intestine is a little bit like more abrupt. A little bit has like a little bit more of an edge to it. Maybe a little bit more of a clip, but again, there's this quality of like, if you feel into it, especially if they're not completely in balance, it may sound a little bit like they're talking down to you, like they're trying to school you, because they're superior. Right? And deservedly so. Yeah. All right. I'm sorry this occurred to me now. Maybe I'll take some time this week, and before next class, I'll look for some memes or images online that kind of encapsulate visually, like some sliver of an aspect of these CFs. All right, let's take a break till let's say 5 of, and then we'll talk about the large intestine. We'll come back at 10:55. Okay, so the large intestine is an interesting official. In terms of the channel, it's relatively simplistic. Um, it starts around the large intestine. There's an aspect of it that descends down through the leg that emerges. There's one branch that emerges at stomach 37, which is considered to be the lower hussy point of the large intestine. You'll cover these a little bit later if you haven't already covered them. And then it rises through the lungs and then ascends through the throat, right, along the side of the throat and through the SCM muscle, over the jaw, and then around the mouth. And interestingly enough, this is the only meridian, and the sinew meridian as well, that crosses to the other side. So actually, you know, as the large, and then, you know, there's the branch that ascends from the index finger up the arm, over the shoulder, right, around the neck, like up the shoulder, up the neck, you know, across the jaw, and then around the mouth, like kind of meets here, and then goes around and then ends here. It's really interesting. And it crosses through DO26 to reach here. And there's another aspect of it that joins the stomach channel here. It meets, like the stomach channel meets here as well. So very interesting, right? It kind of crosses over to the other side. So when you're actually like clearing the channel, you want to do like, you know, if you're clearing the left side large intestine channel, you want to finish here. Weirdly enough, we don't talk about that much, but yeah, it doesn't just come up here and then in there. It comes up here, goes around the mouth, and then ends there. And even the sinew meridian actually kind of like is the only one of the sinews that like wraps over the head to join to the other side. All right. So the large intestine channel is the minister that's responsible for transit. The residue from the transformations stem from it. The residue from the transformations stem from it. So that means there's something left behind. And that is what's valuable, right? Those last precious bits of fluid and water and those precious minerals, like the heaviest of the minerals that are then absorbed, right? But the key is that it's responsible for transit, which is very interesting. And again, it's a foo, right? So foo, by and large, with the exception of the gallbladder, they hold something for a short period of time and then they move it along. And even the gallbladder to some degree does that, but it just holds things longer than other foo, right? Everything is about movement. And again, this sort of rhythmic movement that combined with the wood, which allows for this sort of like quality of marching on through time, right? The liver is really, along with, you know, the metal and the wood, but the wood especially is really about like the chronicity of things, the chronological progression of things. But and then again, thinking about like infusing the quality of the wood, that's about the smooth movement, right? But that smooth movement needs to be like not too hasty, not too slow. And it has to, that quality of movement is, you'll know it's right when you feel ease and freedom, right? The chi is coursing at the speed it needs to be going when you feel ease, when you feel loose and flexible. If you're going too fast, you're going to tighten up. If you're going too slow, you're going to tighten up or get weak. Right? It's just thinking about like when you're into some kind of like physical activity, right? If you're moving too fast, it'll feel uneasy in your system. If you're moving too slowly, it'll feel uneasy in your system. But then there's a sort of quality of like the quality of the rhythm of the pacing, right? That is sort of contributed by the metal. Okay. So there's this quality of transformation and there's this quality of transit and movement. So, you know, like many foo, it wants to turn one thing into another thing by virtue of holding on to something and letting go of something else, or by virtue of processing something so it changes its state. Like that's the stomach, right? The small intestine is very similar to the large intestine, right? It absorbs something that's precious and then, and then moves on what's not precious. All right. So it's called Da Chang, right? Da just means large, big, right? This is and it's not about the length, right? Because the small intestine, I believe, is longer than the large intestine. It's about the size of the tube, right? The small intestine tube is small, and then the large intestine is a bigger tube, okay? And Chang, Da's large, Chang shows the light rays of light shining down from the sun, spreading out, right? So just like the small intestine is a small spreading brightness, this is a really big spreading brightness, right? Along with the flesh radical, which implies that it's, it's a piece of meat in your body. So this means that there's more yang qualities to it, which is kind of weird because the small intestine is like part of the fire official, right? It deals with a lot of the toxic heat that is first produced in the first stages of digestion, right? So it's built to handle that extra yang. And then the large intestine, which is sort of deeper, lower in the bowel, in the body, right? Sort of paradoxically or complementarily, as a yang ming, there's a lot of yang qualities to it because it deals with like the more subtle stuff, interestingly enough, right? And paradoxically, it also deals with the more dense stuff, right? So it's not just this slurry of stuff that it gets from the stomach that the small intestine takes care of. The large intestine takes care of like, it extracts the most refined of what's left in the waste, and it moves on the heavier and more dense aspects of the waste. So in a way, the extremes between the yin and yang aspects of the material it deals with are like at a much further end of the spectrum. So it's really interesting in that way. I don't know necessarily what that means in terms of how people show up, but it's just an interesting aspect of the large intestine. So it's responsible for the transit, means moving along the Tao, right? The path of, the alimentary path, the alimentary canal. And similarly, that's how we walk our life, right? We eat our life. We're attracted by something. We move towards it. We take it in, right? We assess it. We take it in. We process it. We integrate it, and we, let go of what doesn't serve. What's the waste, right? And so this has a lot to do with, transforming the most dense and the most subtle that remains, right? So this deals with like what we would consider like the more heavy, deep, and real aspects of life, right? These huge things that transform us in a way that help us to transcend our older, more mundane level of reality. So these would be not like, oh, I was inspired to juice today. No, this means like I was inspired to like change my religion. I was inspired to change my whole career. I was inspired to change my identity. I think about Sinead O'Connor, who, so unfortunately died a few days ago. Very sad, very tragic, suffered from bipolar disorder. She, at one point, became a type of priest in a facet of Catholicism that wasn't really recognized by the Roman hierarchy, but she became a priest. And then I think 5 or so years after that, she became a Muslim, right? So there's this sort of like quality of reaching for, seeking inspiration that's not just comforting and nice, but that's transformational. Now, to some degree, lungs will do this too, but I just see it kind of more intense, and I don't know why, but I just see it show up more intensely in large intestines. And maybe that's the aspect of the transformation that occurs within these organ systems, right? Like transforming air into like the usable oxygen and other gases in our bloodstream, that's not like a lengthy process. That's not a very involved process. It's just like I'm taking air out there and I'm infusing it into my blood. Like, okay, that's a great trick. Hats off, to you. But show us what you have, show us what else you have today for us, Mr. Long. Well, like, okay, now the large intestine comes in. Like, I'm going to turn your, the residue of your burrito into like the most fundamental aspects of you. Like, wow, that's okay. Yeah, now we're talking, right? So I think that like this quality of like, it's a food, plus it's dealing with the most refined, the most precious, and simultaneously the most dense, the most like the ugliest aspects of ourselves, right? The stinkiest, nastiest aspects of ourselves. Like, like I remember like working in a hospital and I was talking to these respiratory therapists and they were like, yeah, sputum is fine. Like it doesn't bother me, but like, they don't want to touch like feces. It's like, oh my God, right? That's, right? Like I can deal with phlegm, but, yeah, I couldn't be a nurse. I couldn't deal with like people's poop, right? So, and people who work with the filthiest aspects of ourselves, these are like often like the untouchables, the people that we look down upon the most. Like honestly, like to what level of esteem do you hold the people that pick up your trash? Like I find them to be like, I hold them in incredibly high esteem, because I told you when I moved to New York the week either just before or just after, I can't remember exactly when, a garbage strike. Oh my God, right? The smell was indescribable. And there was like these mountains. Again, this is like a city of like large apartment buildings, right? So, in a square block, you've got, I don't know, 50,000 people, 20,000 people. Imagine how much trash they make every day. And it's all piled in these giant bags all around, like on the sidewalk, just overflowing everywhere. It was, oh my God, right? So, we tend as a society, maybe not us individually, to look down upon the people that work with the most disgusting stuff, right? But where would we be without them? Oh my Lord, it would be horrible, right? And I think it's really interesting that the Egyptians were like, they revered the dung beetle because the beetles would like find animal feces and roll it up into a ball, and then they would hide the eggs inside that, because who's going to mess with a ball of crap? Nobody, right? So the eggs were pretty safe, right? So these are the people who are like really into like keeping it real. They deal with the great unwashed. They deal with the foul, the disgusting, the stinky, what's not beautiful. But these are also like the people who become artists that use found objects, that transform trash into something amazing. The people that say, you know what, I'm going to take all of these old tires and I'm going to put them to good use to like, oh, I'm going to make airships, right? These homes out of like, these tire garbage, right? So these are the people that are really willing to get their hands dirty. There's a great movie called The Kingdom with Jamie Foxx and Chris Cooper, I think his name is. I love this guy. And they're investigating this bomb that went off in Saudi Arabia, and he's part of this FBI team. And Chris Cooper's down here in the blast site, which is like this giant crater filled with, and then, everything was on fire. So the fire trucks were like spraying all this water on there. So, it's this giant crater, explosion crater, that's like this pit of like garbage and refuse and water and mud. And he's like, you got to get down in there, man. You got to get dirty. You got to get filthy, right? That's a large intestine, right? Yeah, right? They're willing to deal with all of like the worst of the worst to create something valuable and beautiful, which elevates us. Why? Just for no reason, because that's what we should do. We should always be, acknowledging the earth, the earthly, but we must transcend. We must transcend. Even if it's like what seems like to the outer non-metal person as a rejection of values and standards, they're actually holding themselves transcendent to your mundane, boring, valueless standards. Like they're the people who are like, they're out there, like they dress the way they want to dress. They may look a little unkempt and unfilthy. Like, I don't buy into your BS. Like I have to look this way and drive this nice car. Screw that. You know, like I just love that. You know, there's like all of this, all you think it's like all this stuff you think so important, it's worthless. It's useless, waste of time, waste of energy. Screw that, right? So when it's in balance, like we can really acknowledge all aspects of life. We can see the rose bush, we can see the dog dirt, right? And we see the value of each. Out of balance, I'm focused more on the rose. Out of balance, I'm focused more on the dog dirt, right? We need to draw the circle and bow to everything, right? And that's what really allows the large intestine to thrive. They're not interested in just like temporary excitement, temporary, trophies, temporary pleasures, imbalance, right? They want something that's like abiding and lasting and transcendent, right? So again, it's relationship to the Po. Are they focused more on their animal instincts? Or on the flip side, are they focused in a really cold, brutal, callous way that shows disdain for everyone else? So they only focus on the heavenly without regard to the earthly context of things. That we're not perfect, and you can't force people to be perfect. You cannot legislate perfection, right? You can only legislate what inspires us to be better, right? All right. So again, the Po has a special relationship with the lungs. In terms of the large intestine, this would be like where grief and loss out of balance has twisted their relationship to their Po, where they become disdainful, aloof, uncaring, disconnected. And then in balance, it allows them to move through. Again, they're really good at moving through grief, large intestines, because their very nature is transiting something. It's not about taking something in and just letting go. It's about what the lung does. It sort of like one-ups the lung because it takes in and lets go, but it also transits things. So it has a better relationship with time and rhythm and like this too shall passness to it, right? There's a really great movie called Another Earth. And long story short, this guy, he was like, I think he was like a concert pianist or something like that. He played some instrument. I think he was a pianist. And he was like a concert pianist, very refined, very highly skilled, famous, highly admired, very prestigious. His name was John. He was played by this guy named William Mapother. And anyway, his wife and young son were killed in a car crash. And you see him later, and like his house is a mess. There's dishes, dirty dishes piling up in the sink. There's like trash everywhere. His diet's gone to crap. He doesn't play the piano anymore. He's lost sight, like lost connection to his routine, that which helps him to transcend this mundane reality. And he just descends into this like hellish Po existence of why bother, right? And so that's a great example. Like, and this is what drives people to some degree to suicide, where not every CF, not again, like, not just metal CFs, unfortunately, commit suicide, but every CF kind of has this quality, but metal like really feels the impermanence of everything and is like, in their bones, they're sort of like attuned to the call of the afterlife or what comes next, or at least what is liberated and freeing when our spirit leaves our body, right? So they're okay with letting go of this to experience the relief of for their Po to experience a final sense of relief, right? From the crap and the ugliness and the mean-spiritedness and people who have no values, right? So they're very, very attuned to that. And so while we can think, that they're very kind of aloof and disconnected, they feel things way more deeply than others. They're kind of like the Vulcans. It's not like that they're emotionless. They go through this Kolinar ritual where they purge emotions from their system, but it's really from their consciousness. Deep down, they actually feel these emotions way more intensely than a lot of other species. So, metal CFs can look kind of like indifferent and aloof, but it's not so. Deep down, they have a very close relationship with this Po, closer than the rest of us, where they feel things so viscerally, so powerfully. If they're not balanced by the desire for transcendence and inspiration, if they don't get enough of that, by living their purpose, by manifesting their values and their strengths and what makes them beautiful, if they don't have that in their life, oh my God, then it's so bleak. Their existence is like bones. There's really nothing to hold them to maintaining their existence, and a lot of them will take their own life, unfortunately. All right. So, but again, inspiration, transcendence, beautification, purification, that's in a very healthy, wholesome way. That's what makes metal CFs very, very special. All right, so that's the large intestine. If you have any questions, just let me know. Otherwise, I will see you next week.
Cool. Can you upload this to the
Will do.
Canvas? I didn't see it.
Will do. All right.